of people moving to live along the border. And so now you have people that are trying to work in these NAFTA factories, right? But so, okay, you have this NAFTA factory, and they're paying maybe $4 a day. That's not in any way an exaggeration. Maybe $4 a day. You have to deal with constant abuses in the workplace. My first entry into this work was actually through NAFTA and doing a social justice trip to the border. And we did tours of the factory and told them that we were business students. And so they presented it to us in a certain way. They allowed us access to things in a certain way. And I remember vividly walking through the factory. It was Zenith. And they had women that were soldering pieces of something to something on these little chip boards. And there was fumes coming up from it. And I asked them, you know, what are those women doing? And he said they're soldering lead onto those chipboards. And I said, lead? Well, what about the fumes? And he said, oh, you know, don't worry about it. Those vacuums suck up all the fumes, so it's fine. But then when you follow the track of the vacuum, this big tube that came out of the ceiling, it was all rusted out. So there were just lead fumes just filling the factory, and people are in there working 12, 14-hour a day. I mean, you can imagine the exposure that was happening in that factory. At another point, they showed us a tube of glue that had a warning about the health consequences of this long-term exposure to this glue, and he laughed because it was in French. And so those kinds of things are happening every day in these factories. Now, you have workers that are in there, they begin to organize, because there's a long history of civil disobedience in Latin America, of people taking it to the streets. And so you have all these workers that take it to the streets. They walk off the line, they're outside of the factory, they're protesting, and what does the manager do? He comes out and he says, look at you, I mean, you guys are beautiful. Look how well organized you are. I mean, this is impressive. I have to say it's impressive. You know, but we failed to tell you that just last week we cut a deal and we're actually closing the factory and we're moving it to India. And they just close the factory, they pick up the whole thing, and they move it to another country, the race to the bottom. Workers that'll work for not $4 a day, maybe $3 a day, where they won't have as many of the protections as they did in Mexico. And so then the workers are left there knowing very clearly that there's very little they can do to organize against this very mobile corporate giant. And so they learn that quickly. And they also learn that there's not a real way to sustain a family on what is being offered through these corporations, through these factory jobs. So let's look at a case study. North Carolina. What is happening in North Carolina? I moved here in 2000, and that was right when the U.S. Census numbers were announced. And that was when they were saying that that North Carolina was the fastest growing Latino state, and people were freaked out. I mean, it was amazing, the talk on radio, on the news, and I was coming from Chicago. So to me, I just didn't quite understand what I had gotten myself into. But I was here and I was doing immigrant advocacy work, and so I was paying attention to all this news, and people were talking about North Carolina nationally. North Carolina was in the national spotlight around immigration. And there was this conversation about, well, why are they coming here? Everybody wanted to know why people were coming to North Carolina. And I remember vividly, I had just gotten my first car, because again, I was from Chicago, so I took the train and the bus everywhere. So I was learning how to drive and really, you know, nervous about driving on expressways. And here I am on 540, this loop that feeds into another loop, and it was so confusing, and 540 would just end. And like everybody had to get off, and I was like, what's going on? And listening on the radio, and they said, we think that it'll take about 25 to 50 years to complete construction on 540. And then the next news story would be immigrants in North Carolina, why are they coming here? And I was just thinking, are you kidding me? Really? I mean, not only have you created an entire economy around this construction of just this one road, just 540. I mean, then there was the adding on a lane to 40, and then, I mean, construction all over the state. So not only were you attracting people to come and do that construction, but for every exit, you needed a gas station. You needed a hotel. You needed a convenience store. And then you probably needed a couple of community complexes that had, could house maybe 500 more people. And then once those were constructed, well, then you needed people to empty the trash and wash the dishes and serve the food and clean those apartments and landscape those yards. And an entire economy erupted constructed around this urban sprawl. Why the urban sprawl? Well, North Carolina realized that after NAFTA, North Carolina was the 10th hardest hit state in the country of NAFTA in terms of displaced workers. So entire local economies in North Carolina were completely destroyed by NAFTA. Back then, the bumper stickers weren't, what part of illegal don't you understand? The bumper sticker said, you sent my job to Mexico. Mm-hmm. And they did. The jobs that the factories, the furniture factories, the textile mills, all of those things were taken out of local towns in North Carolina that had been the economy, the entire local economy, and moved them right on the border of U.S. and Mexico. So North Carolina workers are left with nothing. Entire local economies are gone. So North Carolina started thinking, well, how are we going to respond to this? And they decided that they needed to do a shift. They needed a fundamental economic shift. And that shift was that they wanted to move from a production and agricultural economy to an intellectual economy.